introducing a new feature to the Langstaff letters called Odds and Ends, which will appear from time to time. These letters will serve to cover some important things that do not require a whole article at this time. Here's our first issue. We hope you enjoy it. Climate change. In May 2021, a new book on climate change was published entitled Unsettled: What Climate Science tells us, what it doesn't, and why it matters. The author is a man called Stephen Koonin. Settled science, as an oxymoron, is anything but settled, he says. Jenkins, in his recent op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, captures the author's contribution to the climate literature succinctly. Mr. Koonin argues not against climate change science, but that what the media and politicians and activists say about climate change that has drifted so far out of touch with the actual science as to be absurdly, demonstrably false. Now, Koonin points out that scientific facts supported by hard data and the peer-reviewed literature that stand against the reigning climate change narrative, humans have had no detectable impact on hurricanes over the past century. Greenland's ice sheet isn't shrinking any more rapidly today than it was 80 years ago. Tornado frequency and severity are not tracing up. The number and severity of droughts is not rising over that time either. The extent of global fires has been trending significantly downward. The rate of sea level rise has not accelerated. Global crop yields are rising, not falling. The next economic impact of human induced climate change will be minimal through at least the rest of this century, even if global average temperatures rise by even 3%, 3 centimeters. This is double the Paris Agreement goal. To be sure, what Kramer points out as facts and convincing scientific interpretation has been covered adequately by equally qualified scientists such as William Happer, Professor of Physics at Princeton University, Richard Lindzen, atmospheric physicist, retired from the Professor of Meteorology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Roger Pike Jr., previously Director of the Center of Science and Technology Policy Research at the University of Colorado, and Judith Curry, American climatologist and former chair of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Scientists at Georgia Institute of Technology. What is so significant about this particular book? Well, it is not written by a climate denier, but by an eminently qualified scientist who was the Secretary of Science under the Obama administration. He served under President Obama, who once tweeted, 97% of scientists agree climate change is real, man-made and dangerous. This is precisely what Koonin's book testifies against. Koonin argues not against climate change science. Instead, he argues that what the media, politicians and activists say about climate change has drifted so far out of touch with the actual science as to be absurdly and demonstrably false. That's something to think about. Let's look at Tulsa race riots. It is now 100 years since the little-known but tragic Tulsa race riots of May 1921 took place. On the Tuesday and Wednesday after Memorial Day, mobs of white residents attacked black residents and businesses in the Greenwood district. which had been called the single most worst incident of racial violence in American history. At the time, the Greenwood District was the wealthiest black community in the United States. It was known as the Black Wall Street. Now, in that event, it is estimated that anywhere from 75 to 300 people were killed. However, in the last 100 years, this was not largely known, not even in Tulsa. Recently, the First Baptist Church in Tulsa created a special prayer room with the aim to tell the truth about past sins while asking God to bring racial unity in the community and in the nation. Up a short stairway by the congregation's main worship area, the museum-like exhibit features historical notes, photos, and newspaper clippings, along with suggested prayers. I think we need to confront sin when we can, when we recognise it, and also pray against our blind spots, said Eric Fox, a First Baptist member who came with his wife and their 10-year-old daughter, Kennedy. So for me, this was a way to take a prayerful approach, to do some self-examination, some self-reflection, but also to pray for myself, my family and my church, my community, added Fox, a former history teacher who served as associate principal at one of Oklahoma's largest high schools. Let's move on and look at what happens after COVID-19. What's next? As we come towards what appears to be hope for the end of COVID-19 in America, then what's next? It's a question that arises. There are two major possibilities. One, going back to normal. After 12 months of more restricted activities, lockdowns, face masks, restrictions on numbers in gatherings, churches and restaurants, we're now faced with the restrictions being lifted. So what now? As I wrote 12 months ago, it will never be the same. Life will in many ways never be the same again in regard to many areas, including education, with online learning, shopping, likewise online shopping or outside pickups, eating out, not as much as before, or curbside pickup healthcare, phone consultations, online video visits, communication as the way that people relate to others. Churches, yes, churches are going to change. You could go on and on and on. But let's face it, you can't go back to how it was before the pandemic. The world has changed, and we will need to accept the change. There is another possibility. Number two, it's a time for a reset. Behavioral scientists have long known that times of disruption and trauma also create new opportunities for growth and change. When that happens, our normal routines are shaken up. For example, people are working at home now rather than in the office. Now, for some people, that never happened. And their lives have remained a little bit normal. However, for others, it was totally disruptive. It was then, if it was, there would be a wonderful opportunity to consider some changes in your life, and certainly in your regular routine. It can be a time to start fresh. Think about the things that you have always wanted to pursue and have kept putting off. Well, now could be the time when you can start building them into your goals for the future. Another matter to consider is Black Lives Matter. The founder of Black Lives Matter in St. Paul, Minnesota, recently released a video in which he called out the group's ugly truth, by which he meant their positions on family and education. He declared, "In 2015, I was the founder of Black Lives Matter in St. Paul," said Rashad Turner, who now leads the pro-school choice group Minnesota Parent Union. He said, "I believe the organization stood for exactly what the name implies. Black lives do matter. However, after a year on the inside, I learned that they had little concern for rebuilding black families." Turner's video, published to YouTube last week, highlighted how the group's website stated that it wanted to disrupt the nuclear family structure, and they cared even less, Turner argued, about improving the quality of education for students in Minneapolis. That was made clear when they publicly denounced charter schools alongside the teachers' union. "I was an insider in Black Lives Matter, and I learned the ugly truth. The moratorium on charter schools does not support rebuilding the black family, but it does create barriers to a better education for black children." Black Lives Matter did not respond to Fox's news request for comments. Turner's comments touched on an ongoing criticism of Black Lives Matter, namely that its goals and political positions are much, much more left-wing than the name might suggest. I suggest you go back to the previous Langstaff letter entitled "An Examination of Black Lives Matter" for a more in-depth discussion of this topic. Then we have a little item on churches that are closing and churches that are opening. A study by Lifeway Research, which analyzes church data in the United States, coming from 34 Protestant denominations and groups, found that 4,500 churches closed their doors in 2019, while about 3,000 new congregations were started. Even before the pandemic, the pace of opening new congregations was not even providing enough replacements for those that closed their doors, said Scott McConnell, Executive Director of Lifeway Research. Still, bear in mind that there are between 320,000 and 350,000 Protestant churches in the USA. The close of 4,500 churches represents a loss of 1.4%. Now, the biggest reason for churches closing is a decline in church membership. This is happening mostly in older, established Protestant churches. Currently, evangelical and Pentecostal churches appear to be growing. Well, that's enough for today on these items that we've put together. And we trust you found them interesting. Let's know. And from time to time, we plan to do this and just deal with some of the subjects that we talked about today. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to the Langstaff Letter with Dr. Alan Langstaff. The Langstaff Letter is produced by Frontline Ministries, a ministry of Kairos Ministries. If you'd like to join a discussion about this edition, you can go to Dr. Langstaff's blog at kairosmin.org. We look forward to having you join us back again next week. And remember, the best is yet to be.